Oh, there's something in my chest that I can't hide. Get involved, I'm terrified. 'Cause I've been here before and said goodbye. Oh, are you the one when I try to look, I wish I'd find? Oh, how can I love when I've been hurt 100 times? For you, I give it one more try. Turn away and wrestle with my doubts. Oh, I leave them all behind, but don't know how. Bury my head deep within the crowd, but I'm reaching for your hand to pull me out. Oh, are you the one when I try to look, I wish I'd find? Oh, how can I love when I've been hurt 100 times? You can see straight through my life. Oh, there's something in my chest that I can't hide. When feelings get involved, I'm terrified. 'Cause I've been here before and said goodbye. Oh, are you the one when I try to look, I wish I'd find?
All right. A little bit slow getting started there. Sorry about that. Tonight we are starting the novel Revan. I plan on at least the epilogue and chapter 1. We'll see how far we get. Or, I'm sorry, prologue, not the epilogue. I don't know why I said epilogue. I know the difference. I do. I know the difference. I promise. All right. I'll just settle on back here and start right into it. So if you've been following the other readings, you know that Revan has been mentioned several times. So here he is. Prologue. And this should take place, I believe, actually there is a timeline here. 3,954 years before the Battle of Yavin, or before A New Hope. Depends on when they wrote the source, whether they were just referring to it as A New Hope or BBY, Battle of Yavin, before Battle of Yavin. Anyway, 3954. Here the darkness reigns eternal. There is no sun, no dawn, just the perpetual gloom of night. The only illumination comes from jagged forks of lightning, carving a wicked path through angry clouds. In their savage wake thunder shreds the sky, unleashing a torrent of hard, cold rain. The storm is coming, and there is no escape. Revan's eyes snapped open. The primal fury of his nightmare wrenched him awake for the third night in a row. He lay still and quiet, turning his focus inward to ease the pounding of his heart as he silently recited the opening line of the Jedi mantra, "There is no emotion, there is peace." A sense of calm settled over him, washing away the irrational terror of his dream. Yet he knew better than to merely dismiss it. The storm that haunted him each time he closed his eyes was more than just a nightmare. Conjured up from the deepest corners of his mind, the storm had meaning. But try as he might, Revan couldn't figure out what his subconscious was trying to tell him. Was it a warning? A long-forgotten memory? A vision of the future? All three? Careful not to wake his wife, he rolled out of bed and went into the refresher to splash some cool water on his face. Catching a glimpse of himself in the mirror, he stopped to study his reflection. Even now, 2 standard years after rediscovering his true identity, he still had trouble reconciling the face in the mirror with the man he had been before the Jedi Council had turned him back to the light. Revan, Jedi, hero, traitor, conqueror, villain, savior. He was all these things and more. He was a living legend, the embodiment of myth and folklore, a figure that transcended history, yet all he saw staring back at him was an ordinary man who hadn't slept in 3 nights. Fatigue was taking its toll. His angular features had become thin and drawn. His pale skin accentuated the dark circles under eyes that stared back at him from deep hollows. Bracing a hand on either side of the sink, he slumped his head and let out a long, low sigh, his black, shoulder-length hair falling forward to cover his face like a dark curtain. After several seconds, he stood up straight, using the fingers of both hands to sweep his hair back into place. Moving quietly, he made his way from the refresher and across the small living room of his apartment. He proceeded out onto the balcony, where he stopped and stared out across Coruscant's endless cityscape. Traffic in the galactic capital never stopped, and he found the constant buzz and blur of shuttles speeding by soothing. He leaned out over the railing of the balcony as far as he could, his eyes unable to pierce the darkness that make out the planet's surface hundreds of stories below. "Don't jump, I don't want to have to clean up the mess." He turned his head as the sound of Bastila's voice behind him. She stood at the threshold of the balcony door, the bedsheet draped around her shoulders to ward off the night's chill. Her long brown hair, normally pulled back up from her forehead into a bun on top and a short ponytail below, hung loose and sleep-tousled. Her face was only partially illuminated by the glow of the city below, yet he could see her lips pressed into a wry smile. Despite her joking words, he could see real concern etched on her features. "Sorry," he said, stepping away from the rail and turning toward her. "Didn't mean to wake you, just needed to clear my head." "Maybe you should speak to the Jedi Council," Bastila suggested. "They might be able to help." "You want me to ask the Council for help?" he echoed. "You must have had too much of that Corellian wine at dinner." "They owe you," Bastila insisted. "If it weren't for you, Darth Malak would have destroyed the Republic, eliminated the Council, and all but wiped out the Jedi. They owe you everything." Revan didn't answer right away, but what she said was true. He had stopped Darth Malak and had destroyed the Star Forge. But it wasn't that simple. Malak had been Revan's apprentice. Against the wishes of the Council, the two had led an army of Jedi and Republic soldiers against Mandalorian raiders, threatening colonies in the Outer Rim, only to return not as heroes, but as conquerors. Revan and Malak had both sought to destroy the Republic, but Malak had destroyed his master, and Revan had been captured by the Jedi Council, barely alive, his body and mind shattered. The Council had saved his life, but they had also stripped his memory and rebuilt him as a weapon that could be unleashed against Darth Malak and his followers. "The Council doesn't owe me anything," Revan whispered. "All the good I've done can't balance out the evil that came before." Bastila brought her hand up and put it gently but firmly over Revan's lips. "Don't talk like that. They don't blame you for what happened. Not anymore. You're not the same man you were. The Revan I know is a hero, a champion of the light. You redeemed me after Malak turned me to the dark side." Revan reached up and wrapped his fingers around the delicate hand resting on his lips, then softly pulled it down. "Like you and the Council redeemed me." Bastila turned away, and Revan instantly regretted his words. He knew she was ashamed of her involvement in his capture and her role in erasing his memory. "What we did was wrong. At the time I thought we had no other choice, but if I had to do it again—" "No," Revan said, cutting her off. "I wouldn't want you to change anything. If none of this had happened, I might never have found you." She turned back to face him, and he could see the hurt and bitterness lingering in her eyes. "What the Council did to you wasn't right," she insisted. "They took away your memories. They stole your identity." "It came back," Revan assured her, pulling her close and wrapping his arms around her. "You have to let go of your anger." She didn't fight his embrace, though she stood rigid at first. Then he felt the tension melt away from her body as she lowered her head onto his shoulder. "There is no emotion, there is peace," she whispered, reciting aloud the same words Revan had sought solace in only a few minutes earlier. They stood there in silence, holding each other until Revan felt her shiver. "It's cold out here," he said. "We should go back inside." 20 minutes later, Bastila was fast asleep, but Revan lay on the bed with his eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling. He was thinking about what Bastila had said about the Council taking his identity. As his mind had healed, many of his memories had returned, along with his sense of self, but he knew parts were still missing, possibly gone forever. As a Jedi, he knew the importance of letting go of bitterness and anger, but that didn't mean he couldn't still wonder about what he had lost. Something had happened to him and Malak beyond the Outer Rim. They had gone to defeat the Mandalorians, but they had returned as disciples of the dark side. The official story was that they had been corrupted by the ancient power of the Star Forge, but Revan suspected there was more to it, and he knew it had something to do with his nightmares. A terrible world of thunder and lightning, shrouded in perpetual night. He and Malak had found something. He couldn't remember what it was, and where it was, but he feared it on a deep primal level. Somehow he knew that whatever the terrible secret might be, it was a threat far greater than the Mandalorians or the Star Forge, and Revan was convinced it was still out there. The storm is coming, and there is no escape. So that's the end of the prologue. Part 1, Chapter 1. Lord Scourge raised the hood of his cloak as he stepped off the shuttle, a shield against the wind and pelting rain. Storms were common here on Dromund Kaas. Dark clouds perpetually blocked out the sun, rendering terms like day and night meaningless. The only natural illumination came from the frequent bursts of lightning arcing across the sky, but the glow from the spaceport and nearby Kaas City provided more than enough light to see where he was going. The powerful electrical storms were a physical manifestation of the dark side power that engulfed the entire planet. A power that had brought the Sith back here a millennium before when their very survival had been in doubt. After a crushing defeat in the hyperspace war, the Emperor had risen up from the tattered ranks of the remaining Sith Lords to lead his followers on a desperate exodus to the farthest reaches of the galaxy. Fleeing the Republic armies and the relentless revenge of the Jedi, they eventually resettled far beyond the borders of the Republic-charted space on their long-lost ancestral homeworld. There, safely hidden from their enemies, the Sith began to rebuild their empire under the guidance of the Emperor, the immortal and all-powerful savior who still reigned over them even after 1,000 years. They abandoned the hedonistic lifestyles of their barbaric ancestors. Instead, they created a near-perfect society in which the imperial military operated and controlled virtually every aspect of daily life. Farmers, mechanics, teachers, cooks, janitors, all were part of the great martial machine, each individual a cog trained to perform his or her duties with maximum discipline and efficiency. As a result, the Sith had been able to conquer and enslave world after world in the unexplored regions of the galaxy until their power and influence rivaled those of their glorious past. Another burst of lightning split the sky, momentarily illuminating the massive citadel that loomed over Kos City. Built by slaves and devoted followers, the citadel served as both palace and fortress, an unassailable meeting place for the Emperor and the 12 hand-picked Sith Lords who made up his Dark Council. A decade earlier, when Scourge had first arrived on Dromund Kaas, as a young apprentice, he had vowed to one day set foot inside the Citadel's exclusive halls. Yet in all his years of training at the Sith Academy on Kos City's borders, he had never been granted the privilege. He had been one of the top students, marked by his superiors for his strength in the Force and his fanatic devotion to the ways of the Sith. But acolytes were not permitted inside the Citadel. Its secrets were reserved for those in direct service to the Emperor and the Dark Council. The dark side power emanating from within the building was undeniable. He had felt the raw, crackling energy every day during his years as an acolyte. He had drawn on it, focusing his mind and spirit to channel the power through his own body to sustain him during the brutal training sessions. Now, after almost 2 years away, he was back on Dromund Kaas. Standing on the landing pad, he could once again feel the dark side deep inside his bones. The sizzling heat more than compensating for the minor discomfort of the wind and rain. But he was no longer a mere apprentice. Scourge had returned to the seat of power, of imperial power, as a full-fledged Sith Lord. He had known this day would come eventually. After graduating from the Sith Academy, he had hoped for a posting on Dromund Kaas. Instead, he had been sent to the fringes of the Empire to help quell a series of minor rebellions on recently conquered worlds. Scourge suspected the posting had been a punishment of some kind. One of his instructors, jealous of the star pupil's potential, had probably recommended that he be stationed as far from the seat of imperial power as possible to slow his ascent to the upper ranks of Sith society. Unfortunately, Scourge had no proof to back this theory. Yet, even exiled to the uncivilized sectors on the farthest borders of the Empire, he had still managed to forge his reputation. His martial skills and ruthless pursuit of the rebel leaders caught the notice of several prominent military leaders. Now, 2 years after leaving the Academy, he had returned to Dromund Kaas as a newly anointed Lord of the Sith. More important, he was here at the personal request of Darth Nihilus, one of the most senior members of the Emperor's Dark Council. "Lord Scourge," a figure called out over the wind, running up to greet him. "I am Cecil. Welcome to Dromund Kaas." Welcome back," Scourge corrected as the man dropped to one knee and bowed his head in a gesture of respect. "This is not my first time on this world." Seshel's hood was pulled up against the rain, covering his features, but during his approach Scourge had noticed the red skin and dangling cheek tendrils that marked him as a pure-blood Sith, just like Lord Scourge himself. But while Scourge was an imposing figure, tall and broad-shouldered, this man was small and slight. Reaching out, Scourge sensed only the faintest hint of the Force in the other, and his features twisted in a sneer of revulsion. Unlike the humans that made up the bulk of the Empire's population, the Sith species were all blessed with the power of the Force to varying degrees. It marked them as the elite. It elevated them above the lower ranks of Imperial society, and it was a legacy that was fervently protected. A pureblood born without any connection to the Force was an abomination. By custom, such a creature could not be suffered to live. During his time at the Academy, Lord Scourge had encountered a handful of Sith whose power in the Force was noticeably weak. Hampered by their failing, they relied on the influence of their high-ranking families to find them postings as low-level aides or administrative officials at the Academy, where their handicap would be least noticed. Spared from the lower castes only by their pure-blood heritage, in Scourge's eyes they were barely better than slaves, though he did have to admit that the more competent ones could have their uses. But never before had he encountered one of his own kind with as feeble an attunement to the Force as the man huddled at his feet. The fact that Darth Nihilus had sent someone so vile and unworthy to greet him was unsettling. He'd expected a more substantial and impressive welcome. "Get up," he snarled, making no effort to conceal his disgust. Seshel quickly scrambled to his feet. "Darth Nihilus sends his apologies for not coming to meet you personally," he said quickly. "There have been several attempts on her life recently, and she only leaves her palace under the rarest of circumstances." "I'm well aware of her situation," Scourge replied. Yes, my lord," Seshel stammered. "Of course. That's why you're here. Excuse me, my stupidity." A crash of thunder nearly drowned out Seshel's apology, heralding an increase in the storm's intensity. The driving rain started to come down in stinging sheets. "Were your master's instructions to leave me standing here in this downpour until I drowned?" Scourge demanded. Forgive me, my lord. Please follow me. We have a speeder waiting to take you to the domicile." A short distance from the spaceport was a small landing pad. A constant stream of hover cabs was landing and taking off, the preferred way for those of the lower ranks who couldn't afford their own speeder to traverse the city. As was typical at a busy spaceport, a thick crowd surrounded the base of the landing pad. Those just arriving quickly fell into the queues waiting to hire a driver, moving with the disciplined precision that was the hallmark of Imperial society. Of course, Lord Scourge had no need to step into the line. While some in the crowd cast sharp glances at Seshel as he tried to force a path through, the throng quickly parted upon catching sight of the towering figure behind him. Even with his hood drawn against the rain, Scourge's black cape, his spiked armor, his dark red complexion, and the lightsaber prominently displayed at his side clearly marked him as a Sith Lord. The individuals in the crowd showed a wide variety of reactions to his presence. Many were slaves or indentured servants out running errands for their masters. They wisely kept their eyes fixed on the ground, careful not to make eye contact. The enlisted, the ranks of ordinary individuals conscripted into mandatory military service, snapped smartly to attention, as if waiting for Scourge to inspect them as he passed by. The subjugates, the caste of off-world merchants, traders, dignitaries, and visitors from planets not yet granted full status in the Empire, stared with a mixture of wonder and fear as they stepped quickly aside. Many of them bowed as a sign of respect. On their home worlds they might be rich and powerful, but here on Dromund Kaas they were well aware that they ranked only slightly above the servants and slaves. The only exception to the rule was a pair of humans, one male and the other female, Scourge noticed them standing at the foot of the stairs leading up to the landing pad, stubbornly holding their ground. They were wearing expensive clothes, matching red pants and tops trimmed with white, and both clearly wore light armor beneath their outfits. Dangling from the man's shoulder was a large assault rifle, and the woman had a blaster pistol strapped across each hip. However, the two humans were clearly not part of the military, as neither displayed the official imperial insignia or any indication of rank on their garb. It wasn't unusual for subjugate mercenaries from other worlds to visit Dromankas. Some came seeking profit, hiring their services out to the highest bidder. Others came to prove their value to the Empire in the hope of one day being granted the rare privilege of full imperial citizenship. But mercenaries typically reacted with deference and humility when confronted with someone of Scourge's rank. By law, Scourge could have them imprisoned or executed for even a trifling offense. Judging by their confrontational behavior, they were blissfully unaware of this fact. As the rest of the crowd parted, the mercenaries remained in place, staring defiantly at Scourge as he approached. The Sith Lord bristled at the continuing lack of respect. Sechel must have felt it as well, because he quickly rushed ahead to confront the pair. Scourge didn't slow his pace, but neither did he make a move to catch up with the scurrying servant. At this distance, he could hear what was being said over the wind, or he couldn't hear what was being said over the wind and rain. But Sechel was speaking frantically, gesturing and waving his arms, while the humans stared at him with cold contempt. Finally, the woman nodded, and the pair slowly moved out of the way. Satisfied, Sechel turned and waited for Scourge to arrive. "1,000 apologies, my lord," he said as they mounted the ships. "Some subjects lack a proper understanding of our customs." "Perhaps you need me to remind them of their place," Scourge growled. "If that is your wish, my lord," Sechel said. "However, I must remind you that Darth Nyrus is expecting you." Scourge decided to let the matter drop. They climbed into the waiting speeder, Sechel at the controls. Scourge settled into the luxurious seat, pleased to note that the vehicle had a roof. Many of the hovercabs were open to the elements. The engines engaged, and they rose to a height of 10 meters before the speeder accelerated, leaving the spaceport behind. They rode in silence, drawing ever closer to the massive citadel that stood at the heart of Koth City. But Scourge knew this was not their destination today. Like every member of the Dark Council, Darth Nyrus was allowed access to the Emperor's citadel. In the wake of 2 recent assassination attempts, however, Scourge fully expected her to stay within the walls of the personal stronghold she maintained on the outskirts of Koth City, surrounded by her most trusted staff and servants. This didn't strike Scourge as cowardly in any way. Nyrus was simply being practical. Like any high-ranking Sith, she had many enemies. Until she discovered who was behind the assassination attempts, exposing herself unnecessarily was a foolish and unwarranted risk. Yet her practicality had to be balanced against the understanding that her rank was based solely on strength. If Nyrus appeared weak or ineffective, if she was unable to take firm and decisive action against whoever was plotting her death, others would sense it. Rivals both off and on the Dark Council would prey on her situation, leveraging her vulnerable position to their own advantage. Darth Nyrus would not be the first of the Emperor's inner circle to lose her life. That was why Scourge was here, to root out the secret masterminds behind the assassinations and destroy them. Given the importance of his mission, he couldn't understand why Nyrus hadn't sent a full honor guard to escort him through the city. She should want everyone to know of his arrival. He was proof that steps were being taken to solve her problem, a warning to any other rivals who might be emboldened by the recent attempts on her life. Keeping his arrival almost secret served no purpose, at least none Scourge could see. They passed by the Emperor's citadel and made their way to the western edge of the city. After several more minutes, Scourge felt the speeder begin to slow as Sechel brought it in for a landing. "We're here, my lord," Sechel said, as the vehicle touched down. They were in a large courtyard. High stone walls stood to the north and south. The east end was open to the street. The west was bordered by what Scourge assumed was Darth Nyrus's stronghold. In many ways the building resembled the Emperor's citadel, though on a significantly smaller scale. Their architectural similarities were more than just an homage to the Emperor. Like his citadel, this building would serve both as Nyrus's dwelling and as a fortress she could fall back to in times of trouble, and it had been designed to be simultaneously ornate, imposing, and easily defensible. The courtyard itself was populated by half a dozen large statues, each several meters wide at the base and easily twice as tall as Scourge. The two largest depicted humanoids in Sith robes, a male and a female. They stood with their arms raised slightly forward, their hands palms up. The man's face was hidden by a robe, the common depiction of the Emperor. The woman had her hood thrown back to reveal fierce Sith features. If the sculptor's work was accurate, Scourge knew this was his first glimpse of what Darth Nyrus actually looked like. The other statues were abstract pieces, though each incorporated Nyrus's household emblem, a four-pointed star inside a wide circle. The ground was covered with fine white pebbles. A rare type of lichen that thrived in the gloom of Droman Kas had been planted in decorative patterns throughout the stone, the faint purple glow providing a ghostly illumination. A smooth path of finished stone led from the massive double doors that marked the entrance to the stronghold through the center of the courtyard and out to the small landing pad where their speeder had touched down. Sechel scrambled out of the vehicle and raced around to open the exit hatch on the other side for his passenger. Scourge stepped out of the speeder and into the rain, which had lessened only slightly during their journey. "This way, my lord," Sechel said, heading down the path. Scourge followed him, fully expecting the doors to swing wide at their approach. To his surprise, the entrance remained sealed. Sechel didn't seem taken aback, however. Instead, he turned to the small holoscreen on the side and pressed the call button. A flickering image materialized on the holoscreen, a human male of about 40. He appeared to be wearing the standard uniform of an Imperial security officer, and Scourge surmised he was the head of Nyrus's personal guard. "Our guest has arrived, Murtaugh," Sechel explained, nodding in Scourge's direction. "Did you verify his identity?" Murtaugh asked. What are you talking about?" Sechel stammered. "How do we know this is the real Lord Scourge? How do we know this isn't another assassin?" The question seemed to catch Sechel completely off guard. He seems to be, that is... "I'm not letting him in until I have proof," Murtaugh declared. Sechel glanced back over his shoulder at Lord Scourge, his expression a mix of humiliation and fear. Then he leaned in close to the holocom and, in a low voice, said, "This is completely inappropriate. You've overstepped your authority." "I'm the security chief," Murtaugh reminded him. "This is completely within my authority. Just give me 5 minutes to confirm everything's on the up and up." Scourge stepped forward, grabbing Sechel by the shoulder and yanking him aside. "You dare insult me by making me wait out in the rain like some beggar?" He spat at the screen. "I am a guest. Darth Nyrus herself invited me." Murtaugh barked out a sharp laugh. "You might want to check your facts on that." The holoscreen clicked off abruptly. Scourge turned around to find Sechel cowering against the wall. "I'm sorry, my lord," he said. "Murtaugh has become somewhat paranoid since..." Scourge cut him off. "What did he mean when he told me to check my facts? Was I invited by Darth Nyrus or not?" "You were, of course you were. Sort of." Scourge raised his hand towards Sechel and reached out to the Force. The servant began to gasp and clutch at his throat, as his body was lifted slowly up into the air by an invisible hand. "You will tell me what is going on," Scourge said, his voice devoid of all emotion. "You will tell me everything, or you will die. Do you understand?" Sechel tried to speak, but could only cough and sputter. Instead, he nodded frantically. Satisfied, Scourge released his hold. Abruptly, Cecil dropped the full meter to the ground, where he landed in a heap, grunting in pain before scrambling to his knees. "It wasn't Darth and Iris's idea to hire you," he explained, his voice still raw and rough from the choking. "After the second assassination attempt, the Emperor suggested that her own people could be involved. He suggested she bring someone in from the outside." Suddenly it all made sense. The Emperor's will was absolute. A suggestion from him was a de facto order. Darth Nyriss had invited him here because she'd had no choice. Scourge had assumed he was an honored guest, but in actuality he was nothing but an interloper. His presence was an insult to her loyal followers, and a reminder that the Emperor doubted her ability to deal with the assassins herself. That was why he'd received such a meager reception, and why Nyriss's security chief had reacted to him with such hostility. Scourge realized he was in a precarious situation. His efforts to investigate the assassinations would be met with resistance and suspicion. Any mistakes, even those that were not his fault, would be blamed on him. A single misstep would spell the end of his career or even his life. He was still pondering his new information when he heard a speeder approach through the storm. The sound was innocuous, but it instantly put his senses on high alert. His heart began beating rapidly, and his breathing quickened. A rush of adrenaline caused his cheek tendrils to twitch and his muscles to tense. He drew his lightsaber and glanced up at the sky. At his feet, Cecil cried out and covered his face, assuming the lightsaber was meant for him. Scourge ignored him. In the darkness of the storm, he could just make out the speeder's silhouette, heading straight for them. He reached out with the force, probing the vehicle and its passengers. He felt a bolt of anger rip through him as his suspicions were confirmed. Whoever was in the speeder was coming to kill him. All of this, from Scourge's first awareness of the speeder to confirmation of his hostile intent, took less than 2 seconds. Time enough for the speeder to close the distance and come bearing down on him. Scourge leapt to the side as a barrage of blaster fire was unleashed from the vehicle. He hit the ground in a roll that brought him to his feet just in time to spring clear of a second series of bolts. Moving with the blinding speed of the Force, he raced across the courtyard, bolts ricocheting off the ground just behind him every step of the way. He dived behind the cover of the Emperor's statue, his mind assessing the situation. The speeder had to be equipped with an auto-targeting blaster cannon. There was no other way the shots could have attracted him so closely on his desperate run for cover. Even a Sith Lord couldn't evade that kind of firepower forever. He had to disable the vehicle. The speeder was heading away from him, circling around for another strafing run. Before it could complete its turn, Scourge stepped out from behind the statue and launched his lightsaber across the courtyard. The crimson blade went spiraling through the night, tracing a wide, looping arc. It clipped the back end of the speeder, sending up a shower of spark and flame, and continued on its trajectory to return to Scourge's outstretched hand. The hum of the speeder's engine pitched into a screaming whine as it completed its turn. Black smoke, barely visible against the dark clouds, billowed out from the rear engine. The vehicle began to lurch and wobble, losing altitude rapidly even as it opened fire yet again. Scourge ducked back behind the Emperor's statue, pressing his back firmly against it as a shower of bolts rained down on him. A second later, the speeder flew overhead, its angle of attack dropping so steeply it actually decapitated the statue he was hiding behind. The heavy stone head toppled down toward him, forcing Scourge to break cover to avoid being crushed. At the same time, he saw the speeder slam into the ground. Emergency repulsor fields absorbed the impact, saving the vehicle from being smashed to bits, but it still hit hard enough to send a piece of the damaged engine flying. Holding his lightsaber high above his head with both hands, Scourge charged the downed speeder. 2 passengers scrambled from the wreckage, shaken but unharmed. Scourge was only mildly surprised to recognize the 2 red-clothed mercenaries he'd encountered on the speeder pad back near the spaceport. The male was on the far side of the speeder, struggling to get his blaster rifle out of the wreckage. The female was on the near side, her blaster pistols already drawn. Scourge was less than 5 meters away when she opened fire. He didn't bother trying to block the bolts. Instead, he launched himself upward, his forward momentum carrying him in a high, somersaulting leap that arced over both the woman and the damaged speeder. The sudden move caught her off guard, and though she fired several hurried shots, none hit him. Twisting 180 degrees as he flew through the air, he landed on the other side of the speeder, right beside the male mercenary, just as the man was bringing his own weapon to bear. Before he could fire, Scourge slashed his lightsaber diagonally across his enemy's torso. As the man's corpse toppled to the ground, Scourge turned his attention back to the first mercenary. By this time, she had spun to face him, and as her partner went down, she unloaded another series of shots, forcing Scourge to duck behind the speeder for cover. This time, several of her blasts found their mark. Scourge's armor absorbed the worst of the attack, but he felt a searing pain in his shoulder as a small amount of the particle beam energy found its way through a joint in his armor to scorch his flesh. He focused on the pain, transforming it into anger to fuel the force for a savage counterattack. At the same time, instinctively, he drew upon his opponent's fear, adding it to his own passion and further amplifying the power he was gathering. Channeling his rage, he unleashed a concentrated wave of energy that struck the woman square in the chest. The impact lifted her off her feet and sent her flying backward through the air. Her journey was cut short when she slammed against the base of one of the abstract statues. The sudden stop jarred the pistols from her hands, leaving her momentarily defenseless. Scourge placed one hand on the hood of the speeder and vaulted over it, rushing to close in on his prone foe before she could regain her footing. But the mercenary was quick. She scrambled to her feet and pulled out a short electro rod, its tip crackling with a charge potent enough to knock an opponent unconscious with even a grazing blow. Scourge pulled up short. The mercenary dropped into a fighting crouch, and the two combatants circled each other warily. Had he wanted to, Scourge could have ended the encounter right then and there. Without her pistols, electro rod or not, the mercenary had no chance against a Sith Lord with a lightsaber, but killing her wouldn't get him what he really wanted. "Tell me who hired you and I'll let you live," he said. "Do I look stupid?" she encountered, fainting and making a quick lunge that Scourge easily sidestepped. "You're obviously skilled," he told her. "I can use someone like you. Tell me who hired you and I'll let you work for me. That or throw your life away." She hesitated, and for an instant Scourge thought she might drop her weapon. And then the night was shattered by the sound of multiple blaster carbines. The bolts hammered the mercenary in the back, sending her tumbling toward Scourge. He saw a look of total bewilderment on her face as she sank to her knees. Her mouth moved, but no words came out. Then she fell face down in the gravel, dead. Turning, Scourge saw half a dozen guards standing in the courtyard near the door leading into the stronghold. Among them was a human wearing a commander's uniform. He was short, broad-shouldered, and barrel-chested, with close-cropped blonde hair and a neatly trimmed blonde beard that contrasted sharply with his dark brown skin. Scourge recognized him from the holo, Murtaugh, Darth Nihilus' head of security. Before Scourge could say anything, Cecil exclaimed, "About time you got here." He was still cowering against the wall in nearly the exact same place Scourge had left him after the brief interrogation that had preceded the ambush. "Get up," Murtaugh told him, and the Sith lackey did as ordered. "Clean this mess up," Murtaugh snapped at his guards, who scrambled to obey. Satisfied, the security chief slung his weapon over his shoulder and nodded in Scourge's direction. "Darth Nihilus will see you now." And that is the end of the chapter. And I am actually going to call it there for this session. I don't think I want to jump into another one. I'll do probably two chapters. If they're going to be roughly the length of that chapter, I'll probably do 2 next time. But that'll be that for this reading session. And I will probably come back and play. I haven't decided yet. I definitely will be playing tomorrow night, but I'm not sure about tonight. All right. I will see you all in the next session, whether it's in a few minutes or in a few hours.
My heart is beat. I know the pieces. One is broken, and one is beat. Because I have seen the part. I have known about it. I didn't have anything to say. Follow your heart. Don't take. If you leave it behind. Someone will break. I left you my heart. What did you do? You used to abuse. You left me all shy. Was my love? Was it love? You have no answers.